Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at a very cool pistol that is in their upcoming April of 2020 premiere auction. This is a Colt model of 1907, and it is one of the 205 pistols that was manufactured by Colt for extended field trials that would eventually lead to the adoption of the model 1911 pistol. This is a really cool, iconic piece of American military pistol history. So our story with this, we're going to go ahead and start in 1904 with the Thompson Lagarde tests. And this is when two U.S. Army officers, John Thompson and Louis Lagarde, were tasked with investigating what caliber would be necessary for a new U.S. Army service pistol. There'd been concerns about pistol caliber ever since 1892 when the Army had adopted its 38 caliber double action revolver. There were issues with them in the Philippines that were resolved by bringing back some 45 caliber Colts as well as shotguns. And what Thompson and Lagarde did was they got together a bunch of cattle and some human cadavers and shot them up with a bunch of different pistols to see what appeared to have effect on the cadavers and what did in fact have effect on living livestock. And they shot a variety of calibers from the small end at 30 Luger, 9mm Parabellum, 38 ACP, which, by the way, not 38 Super, 38 Colt, 38 automatic Colt pistol, which was being used by Colt at that time already in Browning-designed pistols, the Colt 1900 and the Colt 1902. They also experimented with 45 Colt, which would be the old revolver cartridge, 45 quote-unquote long Colt, 455 Webley, and 476 Enfield. And the conclusion that they came to was that the small caliber stuff just didn't have much effect on cows. The new U.S. Army cartridge needed to be no less than 45 caliber. Specifically, it needed to be a flat-faced bullet, as flat as possible, which would induce more impact, I suppose, when hitting. It had to be a 250 grain bullet or more, traveling at least 725 feet per second. Now, that cartridge specification would shortly be revised a bit to 230 grains, which is what 45 ACP ended up being. And Colt and Winchester collaborated to develop a new cartridge to meet these requirements, because the U.S. Army was looking for an automatic pistol, and they wanted to get in on the ground floor of that. So in 1905, the 45 ACP cartridge would be designed. Colt, Browning would patent what would become the model of 1905 Colt pistol, and at the end of 1906, the U.S. Army started its trial of automatic pistols, self-loading pistols. They had something like 19 individuals and companies that responded to their request for pistols, saying that, yeah, we're interested, we want to send something. Ultimately, only 8 actually showed up. Colt was one of them, and Colt didn't actually submit a model of 1907. Remember, this is 1906. They submitted a 1905, their first design in 45 ACP. So let's bring the camera back here. Let's take a closer look at the model 1905 and continue this story. So here's an example of a standard regular production model of 1905, which is basically what Colt supplied to the trials. Not this exact gun, obviously. The few differences, Colt actually submitted a couple guns. The one that was fired most had a rounded hammer instead of a spur hammer, but the Army did get a spur hammer as well to test. The gun that was in the tests also was cut for a shoulder stock, because that was something that Colt thought maybe they would want. Turns out they didn't. But the testing, all told, for Colt involved 969 rounds fired through a whole variety of tests. They did some basic function checking. They did an accuracy test. The accuracy test, by the way, resulted in a 10-shot group that was 2.4 inches at 25 yards, which is not bad. That's pretty good. They tested it with overpressure and underpressure ammunition, both of which it was able to handle fine. Well done, Colt and Browning. They did a 500-round endurance test, which resulted in 24 malfunctions, mostly failures to feed. That's basically one malfunction every 3 magazines, which is not so great. It's a good thing they didn't have a cadre of modern gun reviewers there to comment on the pistol, because that would have gotten it a pretty critical reception. They did a sand test on it, which resulted in the gun being completely disabled, could only function, manually operated, racking the slide for every individual shot, and it also broke the sear in the process, also not so great. However, all told, the trials board concluded that this was one of the best pistols that had been submitted. And believe me, by comparison to some of the things like the White Merrill and the Noble, yeah, this was a fantastic piece of machinery, no matter how many malfunctions it had. So they came up with a number of items that they wanted to see improved. Specifically, they wanted a better mag release. The Colt 1905 has a heel magazine release to it. They wanted some sort of grip safety. They wanted a loaded chamber indicator. They wanted some way to tell if the gun was loaded. They didn't like the fact that it ejected out the side. They wanted it to eject out the top. Not entirely sure why, but when they ask, you jump. So the plan at the end of the test was they took the two best results, which ended up being the Colt and the Savage 1907, and procured enough guns to equip 3 troops of cavalry who would test them in the field for no less than a year. This was a really serious test. This would require 200 guns, so Colt agreed to manufacture them. Colt charged about $5,400. It's about $26 per pistol to supply 200. Actually, it was 205 to be exact, and it would take them about 10 months to do. And so about a year after the trial, we get the model of 1907, which we have here. This is an actual trials pistol from the period. This is serial number 193. This went to the 10th Cavalry, H Troop of the 10th Cavalry. It is, kind of has standard Colt slide markings there. It is marked automatic Colt caliber 45 rimless smokeless. It is not anywhere marked model of 1907. However, it has a number of improvements as requested by, by the testing board. So, most substantially, we have a grip safety that is now here. Go. There's our grip safety. The improvements to this pistol, by the way, were very much a collaborative effort. This was not John Browning alone in a workshop. In fact, John Browning patented and submitted for Colt a grip safety design, which was ultimately not used. Instead, the grip safety was designed using the elements of safeties designed by Carl Ebbets and George Tansley, who were both Colt employees. The loaded chamber indicator here was designed by another Colt employee, James Peard. The way the loaded chamber indicator works, by the way, is we have a little button in the breech face there. When a cartridge is loaded, it pushes that back into the breech face, back flush with the breech face, which causes this bar on the outside of the slide, there it is, to raise up just like that, indicating that there is a cartridge in the chamber. The ejection port was also modified to give it more of a vertical ejection pattern. Now, this one has been cut. This one's been modified again in 1909, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this is not the original actual pattern of the 1907 as it went into this field trial. So with all those modifications made, pistols were shipped out. 65 each went to the 10th Cavalry in the Philippines, Troop K, the 4th Cavalry in Minnesota, Troop H, and the 2nd Cavalry in Iowa, also Troop H, as well as 5 guns going to the School of Musketry in California. The School of Musketry pretty quickly got its report back, which basically was completely negative. They did not like the pistol. They were a bunch of revolver-loving, I won't say Luddites, but they were not enthused by the idea of an automatic or semi-automatic handgun. They managed to do all sorts of stupid things with it. They had lots of malfunctions. They had one guy who at one point managed to fire it like this and hurt his hand, not surprisingly. They had one guy who managed to fire it with the locking block not fully in place, and the slide flew off and hit him in the face. You know, a lot of issues that really could have been avoided if they had been a little more cognizant about wanting to understand how to use the pistol. And Colt was, at least for a while, pretty patient in responding to them. Eventually, after a year, trials reports came back from all the rest, from the 3 cavalry troops, and to be honest, they were also not particularly positive results. There were a lot of problems that were found with the pistol. Now, this was kind of to be expected. It was known that this was going to be a harsh test. You're going to throw these things out there for a year with basic recruit soldiers. Ultimately, really, the issues were a lot of problems with feed malfunctions, jamming. They had problems with broken parts, particularly firing pins and sears. And a lot of the troops just didn't like them. They were uncomfortable with the action. They didn't think the loaded chamber indicator was visible enough. A lot of them complained about the push-pull action required to fire the gun, which is a description of how you have to push in on the grip safety and pull the trigger. And these were guys who were used to their revolvers, and this thing just felt very unnatural to them. They didn't like it. So, in response, Colt made a number of changes in the second half of 1909. They brought the pistols all back into Colt, 10 or 15 at a time, and they extended the ejection port, which you can see how all of these modifications have been done on this gun. That cleared up a lot of the malfunctioning issues, a lot of the jamming, as did some redesigns to the ammunition, which was being made by Remington. They reprofiled the hammer spur just a little bit, and they actually extended the grip safety a bit. There were some complaints that the grip safety was too difficult to operate because it didn't extend far enough. So with those changes again made, they went back out to the field trials, where they actually ended up getting a much better reception the second time around. However, some of this was kind of faint praise. I'm going to read a quick quote here from Lieutenant Burnett, Troop H, 4th Cavalry, who is reporting on the final modified version of the 1907 here. He says, to conclude, the present pistol is quite an improvement over the one first issued and tested, but the great number of firing pins broken during this season's firing is evidence that all its structural defects have not yet been corrected. The ease with which the magazine may be bent, with the consequent impossibility of using them in the pistol, raises a question about the durability of this arm in the exigencies of prolonged field service. There is no question but that this pistol is an excellent one, and were the faults mentioned above corrected, would be almost perfect of its kind. But the enlisted men do not seem to like it. Nearly 50% of the men in this troop have fired the Colt's revolver caliber .38, and without exception, these men prefer that pistol to the automatic. I believe that a pistol charge with the automatic pistol would be fraught with extreme danger to those making the charge, as well as their enemy. As a weapon for officers and intelligent, well-instructed enlisted men, this automatic pistol would be a valuable weapon, but its adoption for the use of the average enlisted man and for the great mass of ignorant recruits in time of war, in my opinion, would be most unwise. And there ends the trials of the Colt 1907. You might be wondering how exactly we went from all of that to the greatest service pistol in history and victory in 2 world wars. And I tell you what, those stories will be coming. So first, let's discuss what ended up happening to the 1907s after the end of this trial. Ultimately, the model 1907 was obsolete even before the final trials reports had come back. While it was out in the field being tested by the cavalry, Colt and Browning were already hard at work improving on it, and Browning, in fact, would patent a completely new mechanism for an improved version of the pistol. It would go from the dual link system in the 1907 to the single link system that we know today from the 1911. Well, Browning developed a model of 1909 and a model of 1910 that were both in before these things were completely finished with their testing. So we'll cover the model of 1909 in a separate video. In fact, we'll cover that one tomorrow. But I do want to touch on the actual disposition of these pistols. So 205 of them were initially made. 5 of those were given out as prizes at the 1908 Army shooting competition. Kind of a cool prize, right? Of the other 200, 185 ended up being returned to Springfield Armory by, it was like December of 1911, all back from their trials. There were 15 pistols kind of disappeared. Presumably those are guns that were scavenged for parts as a result of parts breakage during the trials. So 185 come back. It is deemed that Springfield takes a look at them and says, well, it's going to cost us like $5 a gun to put them back in working order. But like, we already know the results of the trial. We already know that Colt and Browning have these new patterns available. And the decision is made instead just to sell them all off. Leave them as is, sell them. They kept 5 of the guns for museums. 2 of them went to the Rock Island Arsenal, not the Rock Island Auction Company, the Rock Island Arsenal in the same city. 2 of them were sent to Springfield, and 1 of them was sent to the Smithsonian. And these were all 5 intended to be museum exhibits, and at least 4 of those guns still remain in their respective museums. At any rate, that left 180 pistols, along with 183 spare magazines and some various other bits and pieces. and they were sold as a single batch to Francis Bannerman, the famous Bannerman Surplus Company, for $1,644.44. And for that reason, well, Bannerman, of course, was a surplus dealer, and he proceeded to resell them on the commercial market. And for that reason, a substantial number of these have actually survived today, which is really cool. The best reference on these guns is the book by Edward Scott Meadows on U.S. automatic pistols. He references having specifically accounted for 66 of the original 205 still surviving today, which for a trials pistol like this is a really high survival rate, and it's because after the trial, they all went to a commercial surplus dealer who was happy to sell them off into the US, and many of them remain to this day. So that said, a high survival rate, 66 existing in the world, that's not actually a large number of pistols. If you're interested in one, they are relatively scarce to come by, but this one is coming up at Rock Island's April auction. You can check out their description and their pictures in their catalog, as well as all the other cool stuff that will be in that auction. Thanks for watching.